Today I'm going to explain to you about differentiation. This is an area of my teaching instruction that I feel I am close to or becoming an expert with. So some of you may be wondering, what is differentiation? So I'll begin by explaining it with a quote from Carol Tomlinson, the guru of differentiation. She states, "A differentiated classroom provides different avenues to acquiring content, to processing or making sense of ideas, and to developing products so that students can learn effectively." In other words, differentiation is supporting struggling learners while providing enrichment opportunities for advanced learners. Some people may wonder why differentiation is important or if there's any proof behind what differentiation does in the classroom. Brain research actually supports differentiation and states that the individuality of learners and the nature of what makes effective curriculum and instruction. The research supports that learners' brains are unique. It is up to the educator to provide many opportunities for varied learners to make sense of ideas and information. With that said, that leads us to how can we differentiate? So I will explain to you some general ways to differentiate, and then I'll get a little more specific into particular examples in my own classroom. Differentiation can be done, in my opinion, by three ways. The first thing that the first way we can differentiate is through content, and this is what is taught. The next is when we talk about the process. The process is how it is taught. Another way that we can differentiate is through the product, and that is how learning is assessed. There is another area that I sometimes consider, which is the learning environment, which is where the learning occurs. That can also be differentiated. Now, these three aspects are differentiated according to students' interests, their attitudes, their learning profiles, and their needs. My instruction includes a variety of learning strategies and methods. So I have times of large group instruction in my classroom. I have times of small group instruction in my classroom. There are also times where students will work with partners, and students also have opportunities to work independently to demonstrate their own knowledge. Sometimes students have a choice of how they will do an activity or who they work with or whether they work with anyone, and other times they don't have that choice. So now that you know that I differentiate with how I present material, I'm going to get a little more specific into specific examples in my classroom. I'll begin with language arts and a few examples of how I differentiate with language arts. So for most of my lessons, I'll start with a large group mini lesson or some type of large group instruction where I am teaching a strategy or a skill that everyone should know. An example of this is teaching a reading strategy. So I may teach the eagle eye reading strategy, which talks about using the pictures for clues to figure out those unknown words. This is in a kindergarten classroom, for those of you who are wondering. So from there, once the students know their strategy, they go off and practice it either in small groups, with partners, or independently with materials that support their own individual abilities. So for reading, the students would be working with leveled books that are appropriate for where they are in the reading journey. And so they're all have the same strategy, but it's differentiated by the level of books that the students are working with. Now, this photo is particularly difficult to see, but this is talking about my daily 5 block of the day, or some components of daily 5. Excuse me. Every day we try to get to at least 3 of the 5 components of the daily 5. We have a read to self option, we have a read to someone, we have a listen to reading, work on writing, in addition to word work. Now, these anchor charts at the front of the room explain the expectations for these different stations, and they're frequently referred back to. Once again, these are general guidelines for everyone, but what the students are doing in these particular areas are differentiated. This shows an image of how I have my students organized. They do not have a choice of where they go and when, but the students are grouped in flexible grouping. Now, flexible grouping is when I look at assessments and skill level to determine who should be working together. I like to group my students in sometimes homogeneous groups and sometimes heterogeneous groups. For this particular day, I have grouped my students in homogeneous groups where the students in the same group are working on the same skill, and we have 3 different stations, and so the students know where they'll go in the order that we have those stations. Each group has a color, and the colors, the material that the students are working on, or the version of that activity, the students find in their group's colored folder. So they can independently find their colored folder, find the material that they will be working with, and get started at their station. This is just an image of the bin that is at each station with basic supplies that everyone will need, and then the color folders go inside of the bin. Here's an example of how I differentiate writing, where I have once again one of the anchor charts where everyone can be writing about any of these topics, but the thing that they're focusing on, or how detailed they are with their writing, depends on where they are. So my expectations might be a little bit different. For some students, we might be working specifically on beginning and ending sounds in our words and spacing, where I have another student currently who we're working more with writing 5-sentence paragraphs that include an introduction, supporting sentences, and a conclusion. Not only do I differentiate with language arts, I also differentiate with math. So up here you'll notice my expectations for math, and I have my math stations organized a little bit differently. But students are grouped in these flexible groupings, which I forgot to mention. The reason they're called flexible groups is because they change frequently based on how the students progress or the targeted skill that we are working on for that particular day or that particular station. So my math stations are run similarly to language arts, where the students have a version of the activity that they are working with. Now, another way to differentiate is to kind of provide more support or more guidance, and then for others, you can kind of pull back the reins and give them more freedom. You can also differentiate through questioning and asking higher level questions to those advanced learners and more of the right there questions for those that are in need of those types of questions. I incorporate lots of different types of hands-on activities during my lessons, and there's lots of movement in my daily routines. Now, this doesn't really have to do with my math stations, but in general, I do try to consider the needs of kinesthetic learners, visual learners, and auditory learners, and meet their needs through different activities throughout the day. During our win time, I work with 3 other kindergarten sections, and we all switch children to focus on specific needs for these students. So the students are working on a targeted skill. So right here you can see they're working on oral counting, and over here they're working on number identification. So every group is working with a different teacher in a small group setting to hopefully give them the individualized attention that they need to help them be successful. We have language arts and math instruction during our response to intervention time, which we call WIN, What I Need. Now these ones again are flexible groups, and after we do grade level assessments, we reconvene during our professional learning community, our PLC, to determine how we will regroup students. My professional learning community has chose to focus on differentiation for our PPG this year, our professional practice school. So we are becoming experts as a grade level team, which is nice to have the support of one another and to learn more about differentiation from one another as we share our ideas. Now that pretty much wraps up just a little snapshot of how I use differentiation in my classroom. Feel free to post any comments or questions about differentiation, and I'll try my best to answer them. I am still learning in this process as well, and the more research I do, the more things I want to try in my classroom. So as you begin on your journey, don't be intimidated, don't be overwhelmed. Just start small and try to differentiate just one subject or one lesson and make it grow from there. If you're looking for a great resource, Carol Ann Tomlinson is the master of differentiation. She has several books available giving insight to how to differentiate. And this particular book is called How to Differentiate in a Mixed Ability Classroom. And it has lots of great ideas for differentiation and reasons why we differentiate. And it's just a really good book to pick up if you're searching for a book to further your learning on differentiation. Thanks for listening.